Today I'm down here in windy Ojai, California, taking a look at the all-new 2021 Nissan Rogue. This is easily Nissan's most important product launch of the year because the Rogue is their best-selling vehicle. And depending on the month we're talking about, over the last few years, this has been the best-selling vehicle in North America that's not a truck. Clearly, this Rogue has some incredibly big shoes to fill, and as a result, Nissan didn't deviate too far from the formula that made the previous model a success, although this is an entirely new vehicle. There's clearly a family resemblance between this Rogue, the previous generation model, and the rest of the Nissan lineup. We have the strong V-motion grille up front, although it's a little bit edgier than before, and certainly edgier than before are these standard LED headlamps. You'll find those on all trims. They're divorced from the turn signal and the accent light, which is right here at the top of the bumper. This is what we've seen in some other new vehicles out on the market lately. LED fog lamps are available, they're down below, and then we have some functional aero vents on each side. These help reduce pressure up front and help improve overall aerodynamics. Bucking the general automotive trend of vehicles getting larger and larger with every successive generation, the Rogue has actually shrunk just a hair for 2021. This is 183 inches long, making it 1.5 inches shorter than the previous generation Rogue. The previous Rogue was unusual in this segment for North America because it had an optional third row. It was one of the very few smaller crossovers that had that option. That is not returning for this model year. But the dimensions of the Rogue haven't truly changed too much from 2020 because a lot of the difference between the previous generation Rogue and this model happens up front in the bumper and of course back here in the rear bumper. You'll notice that this generation isn't just squarer up front, the side profile is also a little bit squarer and therefore a little bit more cargo practical. Although shorter than the current generation Mitsubishi Outlander, this is about 2 inches longer than a RAV4, so it's on the longer side of the segment. The tasteful and restrained styling continues as we move to the rear. These are combination LED tail lamp modules, which means that the brake lights and the parking lights are LEDs, but the turn signals are incandescent. I'm surprised by that because I am driving the very top-end trim, and I had expected full LED modules in this model, like we do see in some of the competition. Admittedly, not all of it, however. At the bottom of the bumper, we have well-integrated parking sensors, a tasteful amount of chrome right there, and no visible exhaust tips. It's tucked up under the bumper. Be sure and let me know what you think about the design in the comment section. I think the Rogue is one of the most handsome entries in this segment. It's not quite as beautiful as the Mazda CX-5, but it definitely has a reserved elegance to it. I'm glad that Nissan didn't do anything controversial with the design, and again, that's pretty much expected because of how many Rogues they sell. As we see with most of the Japanese competition, Nissan has tossed all of their latest driver assistance technologies onto the Rogue. We have their latest Safety Shield 360 technology with autonomous emergency braking, pedestrian detection, blind spot monitoring, rear crosstalk detection, and rear autonomous emergency braking standard. Cross-traffic detection and blind spot monitoring are not standard on the RAV4 or CR-V at this time. Unlike the RAV4, however, adaptive cruise control is optional on the Rogue. The ProPilot Assist system includes more aggressive lane centering, adaptive cruise control functionality, and new for 2021, it will automatically adjust its speed based on the navigation inputs, so it will slow for curves, junctions, and even freeway exits. At least for the moment, all Rogues will have one engine and one transmission, a 2.5-liter four-cylinder engine and a continuously variable automatic. This produces 181 horsepower, an improvement of 11 over the last generation Rogue, and 181 pound-feet of torque, a slight bump over last year as well. If you were looking for more horsepower or a hybrid or plug-in hybrid system, you'll have to look elsewhere, at least for the 2021 model year, because this is the only engine that we're going to be getting. Front seat comfort is excellent in this top-end trim. This is the latest version of Nissan's zero-gravity seat design. We have a two-way adjustable lumbar support. I really wish that was four-way lumbar. I think that's really the only thing this seat is missing. There's a two-position power memory over there on the driver's door. We have a manual tilt telescopic steering column with a large range of motion and a power passenger seat in this top-end trim, but it doesn't have the two-way lumbar that the driver's seat has. To give you an idea of how comfortable I found these seats, at least for my body shape, I drove down here to this area to review this car, 4.5 hours in a Lexus RX, and now I've spent about 4.5 hours in this Rogue. I find these seats more comfortable than the ones in the Lexus. If you're a taller driver, you'll be happy to know that as with other Nissan products, the front seat tracks have a pretty decent range of motion. You can move pretty far back, and there is a large amount of headroom. If I put this seat all the way down into a more relaxed driving position, if I were a taller person, I have about 5 inches of headroom left, and this does have the power moonroof. A spacious back seat has long been a huge reason to look at the Rogue over the RAV4 or CR-V, so I was surprised that at least on paper, this interior appears to have shrunk just a hair for 2021. According to the numbers, this has slightly less combined legroom, that's front row plus second row, than the previous generation. Now, I've asked Nissan, they're waiting for some clarification back from Japan on this, but I suspect that they may have changed the way that they measure legroom because this is significantly roomier than the RAV4 that I have at home as a long-term vehicle. You can see I have about 6 or 7 inches of legroom left, meaning this is going to be much more accommodating for adults or rear-facing child seats than something like the Toyota, even though they appear a little bit closer on that chart. The Rogue is also a little bit wider across the rear bench than some of those other options, making it more comfortable if you plan on mixing adults or teenagers and child seats in the rear. But as you can see, there's significantly more room between this seat back and the front seat back, so if you have those larger child seats, especially the rear-facing ones, it's going to be a lot easier to put them in here and have an adult up front. Scooting all the way over to the right side, this front seat back is all the way back in its tracks. I have about 3 inches of legroom left. The rear seats offer a 2-stage recline. We have a softly padded armrest, no additional storage there, 2 cup holders, and 3-zone automatic climate control available. Nissan is very focused on family friendliness with this generation of the Rogue, which is why we have rear doors that open to almost 90 degrees. That makes it a lot easier for adults to get in and out of the rear. We also have a very square door opening there, and it makes it easier to get child seats in and out of the vehicle. Speaking of child seats, they've bumped the latch anchor count back here to 5. So we have outboard positions right there, and then we have a 5th one right here if you wanted to latch anchor a child seat right here in the center seat position. Although keep in mind, it's not going to be quite centered in that rear seat. It is going to be skewed a little bit towards the driver's side. Another child seat practical touch is that the shoulder belt comes out of the seat itself, not out of the ceiling. That means that if you want to secure a child seat using the shoulder belt, it is going to be more centrally located in this middle seat. Now, the second row seats do not slide forward and backward like they did in the previous generation. That's because the third row has been completely eliminated. While I'm on the subject of seat belts, we now have load limiters and pre-tensioners for the rear seat belts, not just the front. Nissan says that this is a segment first. We also have thorax airbags for all outboard seating positions that are integrated into the seats themselves, and then curtain airbags as well. Since this is the top end trim, we also have well-integrated window shades. As before, a big reason to get the Rogue over some of the competition is the size of the cargo area. We have nearly 40 cubic feet of storage space behind the second row, and we still have Nissan's split dividable cargo system here. So we can lift the load floor up so that way it is level with the rear, and then you can open these sections separate from one another. You can use them as dividers to help keep cargo from sliding around back here. You can also use them to hide thinner cargo away from prying eyes, and you can lower it all the way down if you want to use some of that extra height. This isn't quite as useful as the Nissan divide and hide cargo system that we saw before, where there were 2 different tiers of storage separated by about 10 inches or so you could put much larger cargo one on top of the other. Diving all the way down the rabbit hole, we find a temporary spare tire and what looks like enough room here if you wanted to put a full-size spare tire yourself aftermarket, although the load floor would no longer go to its lower level. In a cargo practical touch, Nissan allows you to lower the rear seat backs either from a lever back here in the cargo area or from one right on the seat back itself. Some folks accused the previous generation of the Rogue of having a rough and ready interior. Personally, I never had a problem with it, although it was a little bit more pragmatic and practical rather than overtly luxurious. This generation has sliding visors for the driver and front passenger. There's a large panoramic moonroof that extends to just over the second row passengers' heads. Those roller shades that I showed you before in the doors, height adjustable shoulder belts, and height adjustable headrests. This model has a 2-tone interior. We have perforated leather sections, although the model that I'm driving does not have ventilated seats. They are heated, as are the second row seats. You can see that the bolstering is not too aggressive on the seat back and seat bottom cushion, so larger folks shouldn't have any trouble with these seats. That's something that we've seen from Nissan for a while. This interior features a mild 2-tone design. The bulk of the interior is this charcoal color, although there are some dark brown accents like we find on the top of the door there. Parts quality is significantly improved in this interior over the previous generation Rogue, and this now has one of the nicer interiors, both in terms of style, I think, as well as in terms of parts quality. A lot of soft touch materials going on the door, a lot of stitched components. That stitching continues as we move on over to the dashboard, where we have a soft touch upper section right there in brown, soft touch stitched materials right here in the charcoal, and then really believable open wood pore trim here. Although this is not real wood, this is actually imitation wood. It definitely looks like wood. The giveaway that this is imitation wood, not real wood, is that it's smooth, and real wood would of course be rough. More stitching as you see moving over there to the center console, and then we have one of 2 different infotainment screens depending on the trim level that you get. This is the largest one available in the Rogue, and really one of the largest available in this segment, period. Nissan appears to have really improved the responsiveness of this system. We also have an improved 360-degree camera view. It's much crisper than the last Nissan that I drove. If I click over to the main menu, you'll see that the transitions are pretty snappy. If I move over here to CarPlay, you'll see that we have wireless smartphone integration, which is really a handy touch. My iPhone is connected wirelessly and charging right there in the wireless charging mat. Moving down from there, we have the controls for the tri-zone automatic climate control that this particular model has. There's a 3rd zone back there in the rear. We have the engine start-stop button, 2 USB ports, 1 USB-C and 1 regular USB, 12-volt charging port, and then we have a joystick-style shifter. There's a lock-unlock button on this side. We press that in and then pull back for drive, toggle back there for the manual mode, press and then push forward for reverse, and then park is this P button right on top. You can see the wireless charging mat up front. We have two very large cup holders there. Those should have no problem taking some of those larger takeout drinks. An electric parking brake, auto brake hold. This is the drive mode selector. This particular model is not all-wheel drive, it's front-wheel drive, so we get a slightly different setup here if you choose the all-wheel drive model. We get some more of that imitation wood trim down here in this area. You can see it right there, right around that release for that center console. And then this is actually a different texture and a different material entirely. This sort of has the effect of maybe brushed wood or brushed bamboo, something along those lines, but it's also an imitation. It's not real wood, of course. Right here between the front seats, we have a bifold center armrest. This is leather wrapped like the seats are, and it reveals a pretty accommodating storage area. I don't think I'd be able to fit a gallon of milk inside, but perhaps maybe a 2-liter bottle might fit. One of the reasons to use an electronic shifter like this is that it uses less room in the center console, and that allowed Nissan to give us this storage area right there under the cup holders where you could put small electronic items like your smartphone or, of course, small handbags. Every version of the Rogue gets an LCD instrument cluster, but the top-end trim has this large 12-inch display rather than the 7-inch display that we find in the lower-end trims. This shouldn't be too much of a surprise because Nissan has been pretty aggressive at deploying LCDs into a wide variety of their models, and even entries like the Nissan Kicks have a large 7-inch LCD. The system offers two basic looks, one with larger dials and a smaller information section in the middle. And then if we change the cluster view via the controls on the steering wheel, it pushes the dials over to the side and then gives us a larger area in the middle for information. That information can include things like audio information. For instance, if I turn on Apple CarPlay right there, we'll see that over there on the side. There are a number of different screens here. Of course, our typical trip computer readouts like that. Tire pressure, other safety information, status of the vehicle's active safety systems, turn-by-turn navigation directions, dedicated infotainment screens right there, speed limit readouts, and then of course the ability to change certain vehicle settings. This is where you would adjust the vehicle's active safety systems as well as the heads-up display. It's a little bit hard to film heads-up displays, especially when the vehicle is not in motion, but Nissan says that this is one of the largest heads-up displays available. It will give you turn-by-turn navigation directions. You can see the status of the vehicle's active safety systems right there in the middle, and of course your speed. No new vehicle would be complete without a new steering wheel design, so of course we have one here. It's a new flat bottom design, something that Nissan has been doing a lot in their vehicles lately, that helps make entrance and exit of the vehicle a little bit easier because the steering wheel isn't quite as close to your knees. It's really handy, especially for the taller folks out there. This is a 3-spoke design with a split bottom spoke. It's just barely open there in the middle, paddle shifters on the back, and some sport grips up top. The rest of the controls are located on these relatively thin side spokes. We have the controls for the Pro Pilot Assist system over here on the right, and then controls for the infotainment system over here on the left. And then this button and toggle arrangement controls that multifunction LCD, along with this little button right here that brings up a different menu. It's been a while since Nissan switched up their switchgear, but we do have new memory seat controls, new mirror controls, and new window controls on the driver and passenger side doors. According to Nissan, everything about the 2021 Rogue is all new. The suspension design, the engine has been significantly revised, even though the displacement remains the same as last year. And of course, the body structure is pretty different as well. The Rogue has lost about 100 pounds, depending on the version that you're looking at, and horsepower has increased very slightly over the last year. That means that 0 to 60 times are a little bit improved, but as we get on this freeway, on the shorter entrance ramps, you'll still notice this is not quite as swift as something like a RAV4 or CR-V. In my preliminary tests out here in Santa Barbara, I ran 0 to 60 in 9.2 seconds. I suspect it's possible that could get a little bit faster when I get this at home, because according to my V-Box, I was going slightly upslope there, so perhaps it could get down to about 9 seconds or so. But that still means this is going to be approximately a second slower 0 to 60 than the base RAV4. This CVT no longer has a mode where it will just sit there and vary ratios. It is always going to imitate an 8-speed automatic transmission. And honestly, letting a CVT just do its thing is actually going to be more efficient and get you 0 to 60 faster. If you're more gentle on the throttle, then the engine does tend to hang out at a specific RPM as you accelerate. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to test 60 to 0 braking distances, but I suspect that this particular model is probably going to be right around 120 feet, perhaps a little bit less, because this has slightly wider tires than some of the competition on it, 235 width tires on this front-wheel drive Platinum model. It's also lost a little bit of weight, as I said before, and that should help the stopping distances. When launching this generation of the Rogue, Nissan made a pretty big deal out of the new suspension design. We have a new multi-link suspension in the rear and a revised suspension design up front. When the road starts to bend, you'll notice that this generation of the Rogue is more focused on handling than the previous generation, specifically handling feel and handling precision. Absolute grip isn't too much different, even though this has lost a little bit of weight, and we do have those 235 with tires on it. Even in this top-end Platinum trim, the tires are a bit more focused on fuel economy and a quiet ride than giving us the utmost grip in the compact crossover segment. But you'll certainly notice the increased precision and the quicker steering rack. We have a little bit better steering feel than we had in the previous generation, and it's a little bit quicker, so you don't have to turn the steering wheel quite as much to get the car to go where you want it to go. And you'll absolutely notice the new suspension tuning. This is certainly a little bit firmer than the previous generation Rogue. There's a little bit less body roll, a little bit less tip and dive, and the rear suspension doesn't get as upset over broken pavement. These changes don't turn the Rogue into a Nissan version of the Mazda CX-5. I think that still has the best steering and handling feel in this segment, but absolute levels of grip are not really going to be far off because the CX-5 has some pretty narrow tires. The other thing that's really been improved in the Rogue is cabin quietness. I don't have my sound level meter with me and I'm not driving on my usual road surfaces, so of course for official scores you'll have to wait till I get this at home, but it is definitely quieter out on the road than the previous generation. And the previous generation Rogue did pretty well in its segment. The other reason you might want to take a look at the Rogue over something like a RAV4 or CR-V is fuel economy. Over 2 days of mixed driving out here near Ojai and Santa Barbara, driving up and over mountain roads like this, I've been averaging 31 miles per gallon. That fuel economy is pretty impressive for a non-hybrid entry. Keep in mind that I am driving the front-wheel drive trim, but obviously if you want better fuel economy, you could look at something like a Toyota RAV4 hybrid. But as far as the non-hybrid models in the segment goes, this is likely going to be among the best in terms of real-world fuel economy. Bottom lining, the way the Rogue feels out on the road is pretty easy. I think Nissan has done an excellent job at the suspension tuning. They've found a really good balance between ride and handling, which are often two ends of the teeter-totter. This doesn't feel ponderous out on the road. It doesn't feel big. It doesn't feel heavy. It has a good solid feel to it out on the road. Unfortunately, it's just not as swift as some of the competition. Acceleration is really my only complaint here. I'm not looking for a 6-second run 0 to 60, but I would like this to be in the same neighborhood as a regular RAV4, down around 8 seconds rather than right here around 9 seconds. For a lot of folks, that's not going to make too big of a difference. 9 seconds is pretty similar to a lot of subcompact vehicles or compact cars out there, and there are a significant number of hybrids that are going to be slower 0 to 60 than this, but if you get 4 or 5 people in here and some cargo in the back, it is going to feel a little bit more sluggish than I'd like. If you want to get your hands on the new Rogue, they will be in dealer lots very shortly. It's entering production right about the same time that I'm filming this video. And it's only going to have a slight price bump over the last generation model, starting at $25,650. That's lower than a lot of its direct competition. If you want all-wheel drive, it's available on all trims for $1,400 extra. The base S trim is also very well equipped. We get those standard LED headlamps, standard 17-inch alloy wheels, the 8-inch version of the infotainment system that we saw in the center console, the 7-inch version of the instrument cluster behind the steering wheel, and we get the standard Safety Shield 360 system. Unlike some of the competition, Android Auto and Apple CarPlay are also standard in all versions of the Rogue. The next step up from there is the SV trim. That'll set you back $27,340. That's where we get the ProPilot Assist system, 18-inch alloy wheels, the 360-degree camera system, and a powered driver's seat. This is going to be one of the more popular trims of the Rogue, and it's probably one of the best deals going in the Rogue. The base trim already has a bit more standard content than most of the competitive base trims, but the SV trim is where you're really going to start seeing the value. As always, I'm going to have to hold my final verdict on the Rogue until I can get my hands on one of these for a complete week so we can run it through our usual battery of comparisons and tests, but it's easy to see why the Rogue sells so well, and I think that this version is going to sell even better than the last model. I think that the styling is exactly where it needed to be. I like the look up front. Let me know again what you think about that in the comments section below. This generation of the Rogue has continued to refine what's made the Rogue the best-selling vehicle in Nissan's lineup. It has handsome, good looks. It handles well out on the road. We have an awful lot of interior volume, very practical storage area in the back, a ton of safety technologies, standard on every model, and the additional safety technologies that we find on this Platinum trim, like the 360-degree camera system and the ProPilot Assist system, are available in one step up from the base model. So it's a little bit different than we see in the competition. On the downside, it doesn't have as much pep as we find in some of the competitors, but Nissan counters that with an awful lot of practical touches, like the door access sensors on all 4 doors. We have little buttons there for the keyless entry system, rather than simply on the front doors like we find even in top-end trims of most of the competition. That's going to make this definitely more family practical, and of course nice touches like the rear doors opening a complete 90 degrees. Based on previous generation sales, I suspect that most shoppers are going to be more interested in touches like this than a faster 0 to 60 time. Let me know what you think about that down there in the comment section below. Of course, find us over at facebook.com/AlexNautos, and I'll see all of you next week.